So Apple just released a new iPad Pro 2021, and to be honest, I think it's a complete and utter waste of money. So, if you're new to the channel, my name is Mikey, and I'm a university student here at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and today we're going to be talking about why I think the iPad Air is probably a better option than the new iPad Pro 2021. Now, the timestamps for everything I'm going to discuss in this video will be available down below in the description, and they'll probably also be available either right here or right here. But in any case, the first thing I'm going to talk about is actually the conclusion and basically why everybody clicked on the video, and that is why I think the iPad Air is probably a better option for students versus the iPad Pro. The second thing I'm going to talk about is something called diminishing returns, and that essentially means that just because you pay more money for something, just because you pay more money for a specific product, doesn't mean it's better than something that is cheaper, or significantly better than something that's cheaper. Then I'm going to compare the actual iPad Air and iPad Pro and talk to you a bit about the differences between them. Then I'm going to talk about the similarities, and finally I'm going to talk about a concept where you actually want to spend your money where you spend your time. Now, like I promised in the intro, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the conclusion and why you guys actually all clicked on this video. So the iPad Air is probably better for students than the iPad Pro because the iPad Pro is mainly directed towards people that use it for their full-time job. Now, everything that they actually put in their recent lineup of MacBooks and MacBook Pros, they actually put that in the iPad. This new chip called the M1 chip, they put that in the iPad, and that is so overkill. We don't need that, especially if using it for notes, using it for assignments, things like that. You don't need that, and it's honestly a waste of money, considering that the iPad Pro is 220 Canadian dollars more than the iPad Air, or 620 Canadian dollars more for the 12.9 inch model. That is so much money that you essentially don't need to use, especially because of these small features that won't make a difference at all, especially if you're only using it for school. It is totally not worth it. Now, if that's why you clicked on the video, then please subscribe and like down below before you leave. But if you're interested to learn more why I think the iPad Air is better than the iPad Pro, then let's keep watching and let's talk about the first thing, which is diminishing returns. So in order to best explain diminishing returns, I'm going to use a graph. So let's say I were to buy an iPad from any of the iPad models available at Apple. So we have the iPad mini, the regular iPad, the iPad Air, and the iPad Pro. So if I were to go from not having an iPad at all to buying an iPad mini, which is the smallest size of the iPads, then let's say that'll increase my productivity by 80%, while the iPad Pro will increase it by 100%. So I'm going to put an X right here for the iPad mini, we'll do an X over here for the regular iPad, we'll do the iPad Air, and then the iPad Pro, right? So we said the iPad mini is 80% and the iPad Pro is 100%, okay? So I personally think that going from 80% to the iPad Air, which is probably around 95%, let's put this at 95%, is worth the $250 difference between the iPad mini and the iPad Air, because you do get Apple Pencil support, and then that's how you actually start taking notes. So that's why I personally think the iPad mini and the regular iPad are useless, while the iPad Air is probably the best option. So I do think this is worth the 250 Canadian dollars difference in price. However, I don't think going from an iPad mini to an iPad Pro is worth it, because just because this is 250 Canadian dollars, it'll take me to 95% productivity. Just to bring up an extra 5% and take me to the iPad Pro, you know how much that'll be? That's 250 plus the difference between the iPad Air and the regular iPad Pro, which is $220, which makes it 470 Canadian dollars, which is a lot of money. It's really, there's no point in increasing $470 just to add one or two features. And that's personally why I think the iPad Air is a great option, because it gives you 95% of the options that are basically available on the iPad Pro, and the remaining 5% you probably won't even have used. Now, to talk more about that 5% between 95% and 100%, let's talk about the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro differences. Alright, so I'm going to talk about the differences between the iPad Pro and the iPad Air very quickly, because I realize not a lot of people care about the specs, so we'll just get through them really quickly. Basically, the iPad Pro has an M1 chip, which is basically an upgraded chip that is available in the new MacBooks. You could have up to 2 terabytes of storage on them, which is very useless. Personally, my iPad Pro is 256 gigabytes, and I haven't even used like half of it just because everything is on the cloud. Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud. That's another feature that the iPads all have, so you may as well just take advantage of that, just in case you lose your iPad. Available on both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. You can back everything up to the cloud. There's another thing called center stage, and that is essentially how the camera will move with you as you are FaceTiming someone. So yeah, that's pretty cool, but is it worth 220 Canadian dollars? Probably not. The iPad Pro also gets a bit brighter, so it has 600 nits of brightness versus 500 nits of brightness. Also, is that really a big factor? Of course not worth 220 Canadian dollars. And it also supports 5G. Well, do we even have data plans in the iPad? If you got an iPad, would you put a data plan in it? Most likely not, unless you're using it for your full-time job, like I said earlier. So at the end of the day, it's really not worth that 220 Canadian extra dollars. So now let's talk about the similarities that are gonna be available on both, and that is why I think the iPad Air is better than the iPad Pro. Now, both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro have Apple Pencil support, and that is arguably why I think the iPad is probably like a jacked machine by itself for note-taking. Literally in class, you can take whatever notes you want. You make some cool circles. My circles are not that cool. You make a cool square. I don't know if this is even gonna work because I did the extra line. Okay, let's make a cool, that's awkward. We'll make a cool square over here. You know, you could do cool triangles. You could even record your lectures. I made a cool video about that on how you could record your lectures over here. So now you hear me talking, and Notability, which is the app that I prefer to use, helps you record the lectures. Now, another cool feature that is present in both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro is the ability to take photos and actually input them inside your notes. So one thing that I use actually a lot in classes, sometimes my professors and my teachers won't have posted a specific slide in a PowerPoint, or there's something in a textbook, like a specific diagram that I like, and I want to put it into my notes. So very simply, all I have to do is literally open the camera app, and I could just go around taking these pictures. You could see exactly what I'm doing now. Yeah, I have a cool case, not to brag or anything, but I think it's really cool. I think that's, to be honest, a big factor present in the iPad that you can't find in Macs, but it is present in both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. Now, using the screen itself, both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro have something called the liquid retina display. Basically, it just means like the iPad Air is like glass, so it feels really nice to write on. I also have a paper-like screen protector, which basically makes it feel like paper. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but can you guys hear that? Basically makes it sound like I'm writing on paper, and it also feels like I'm writing on paper. So I enjoy that a lot because it's not very different than a regular notebook, and everything is stored on the cloud, so I don't have to worry about bringing my notes with me to school, forgetting them in a specific place, forgetting to bring them to school. You know, I don't have to worry about coffee falling on them, which has actually happened more times than I would like to talk about. And the battery life is the exact same for the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So why the heck would I pay an extra 220 Canadian dollars or 620 Canadian dollars if you want to get the 12.9-inch model for an iPad Pro that does the exact same thing? Now, I was kind of like, my situation's kind of sucky because I got the iPad Pro in 2018 before they released the iPad Air, and well, before they released the new iPad Air, giving you the option to use the Apple Pencil on it. So I actually do have the iPad Pro. However, if I were to go back, I would get the iPad Air. Now, another cool thing that I talked about in previous videos is that you can actually get the iPad Air for an even cheaper price. Now, there's two ways of doing this. First is by going on the Apple refurbished section on their website, and that updates on a daily basis. How that works is essentially they take in your old Apple products that you bring in for Apple Care, they change the battery, they change the screen, and they basically repost it for sale, but at a discounted price. They can't release it regularly for when you go buy an iPhone or when you go buy an iPad, because that's technically illegal. They can't sell you an item that's been used by someone else. But I told a couple of my friends about this, and that's how they got their iPad Air and their iPad Pro. One of my friends, he got it for cheaper, like by $250 by just going on this refurbished site. You could also go on the student site, and that gives you roughly like a 10% discount on this. So essentially the iPad Air, you can get it for an even discounted price, which is why it's so jacked. And finally, let's talk about spending your money where you want to spend your time. Now, personally, I bought a desk for my room because I wanted to study more, I wanted to get more work done. And having that desk motivates me to get more work done. Just like if I bought a Disney Plus subscription. So actually like 2 weeks ago, I bought a Disney Plus subscription. And now I feel like I need to watch more movies on Disney Plus because I bought that subscription, even though I already have Netflix. So it's making me feel like I need to use my money for what it's worth. So if you buy an iPad Air, then you're essentially gonna wanna get more work done because you know that using the iPad Air, you get a lot of work done. So you're gonna wanna get a lot of work done because you paid for it and you want to get your, your value's worth. You want to get your money's worth of it. And that was the exact same thing when I got my laptop, my mouse, and when I bought my keyboard. I did all this because I knew that having all this would motivate me to get more work done, and it would just make the whole process way more fun. And that's why I think the iPad is sick as well, because it motivates you to get more work done. It motivates you to study more. No one wants to open a notebook. Maybe it's nice to bring out a couple highlighters, bring out a couple pens, but if you have an iPad, you have a computer that you're working on, I don't know, I just feel like it's way cooler. Maybe this is just me, but this is just something cool that I thought would be a great addition to buying an iPad, because it helps you get more work done at the end of the day, right? And that basically concludes the whole video. The iPad Air is probably one of the best devices that you can invest in for 2021, and that's why I think everybody that's a student should invest in the iPad Air if you are thinking of buying an iPad versus the iPad Pro, just because the iPad Pro is way more expensive. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe down below, because it helps me out a lot. And if you didn't enjoy the video, feel free to like and subscribe anyways, because it also still helps me out a lot. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care and take it easy. Why would you do that?